Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the Church of the Covenant, into this sanctuary for a moment of music this afternoon. My name is Jonathan Moyer, and I am one of the Associate Directors of Music here at the Church of the Covenant. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you here for a celebration of the music and artistry of Johann Sebastian Bach. A few housekeeping details before our program begins. The program will proceed continuously with music played on the Newberry organ, which resides in the back of the sanctuary, interspersed by commentaries given by Rabbi Roger C. Klein, whom we welcome so heartily today. In between the 5 selections that are presented, feel free at any point to move throughout the sanctuary. You'll notice it is a large space, and the organ resonates throughout the space. And depending where you sit, sometimes that experience can change. So feel free. Sometimes I like to sit on the side and look back. Other times I come to the front. If you want a little more direct sound, you can go farther back. So please feel free at any time to move around, and you can experience the instrument in that way. I was speaking with some folks at the beginning. This is very much the experience that congregation members from the time of Johann Sebastian Bach would have experienced the organ. The organs of the Thomaskirche in Leipzig are elevated on the gallery level. And so while some people could sit also on the side galleries, most people would be seated in the lower level, and the organ would kind of sing above the congregation, including the choir as well. There was even a kind of swallow's nest way up near the roof, which the Knabenchor, the children's chorus, would sing from, and it would descend, the sound would descend like angels from heaven. Following today's program, if you would like to see the organ up close, feel free to come to the back entrance here. There is some stairs that come up to the gallery level, and we'd be happy to show you the organ. My son, who is assisting me today, will be around to show you things, and you can see up close what it looks like. I want to take also just a moment to welcome those who are viewing us online for our live stream. We welcome you as a part of this moment of music today. And through our live stream, one can go back and also see the video and recording of today's program at a future time. If this is your first time at the Church of the Covenant and you would like to learn more about other programs that take place here at the church, please consider filling in our visitor survey. We have those on the table in the narthex, and if you put your name and email address, we can include you in our weekly e-newsletter that informs you of concerts and events that take place here on a regular basis. We have holiday concerts coming up that you can read about on the back of your program today. If at any point during the program you're in need of the bathroom, there is one in the narthex and also down this hallway located on my left. Again, before we begin the program, I just want to welcome you here, and especially Rabbi Roger C. Klein, who was the kind of inspiration behind this program. I certainly love playing all of these pieces. These are monuments of the organ repertory. I teach them on a regular basis down at the Oberlin Conservatory, but to bring them all together in a single program was his idea. And I thought about this for a while, and I said, well, I'll do this, but on one condition, if you join me. So you can offer some thoughts and commentaries about these remarkable works. It's kind of like lining up 5 major masterpieces of Leonardo da Vinci on view, and each one is so monumental and represents so much. And these organ pieces need a little bit of space around them for us to consider their meaning. They are profound works of art, both from just an aural and emotional level as we listen to them, a symbolic level. They are also profound virtuosic feats. They challenge every organist on the planet. There was a reason why after Johann Sebastian Bach's death, there was a kind of a period of time where his works were kind of unknown, partially because they were so difficult to play, and very few organists outside of the region where he was from could actually play these pieces. And then as word spread and copies were made of these pieces, they began to proliferate throughout Europe, and organists saw the challenge. They took up the challenge. You had artists like Felix Mendelssohn, some 80 years later, who began to become a kind of ambassador of the works of Johann Sebastian Bach, and he played concerts throughout Europe, playing these works, especially many of the works on this program today. And organists just couldn't believe that this could be done on an organ. And we have Johann Sebastian Bach to thank for this. I often have to remind my students, we take this music for granted in one sense. There was a time that organists couldn't do this. And he, through the divine inspiration of the divine muse and a lot of hard work and ingenuity, did something for the first time. He brought this music to life, and he did things with his feet and his hands with an organ that no other human being had ever done. And now these works are ubiquitous. They surround us throughout the globe, on our phones at all times. So think about that today. As you listen to these monuments, listen to them as if you're hearing them for the first time. And I think something very special will be revealed to you. Before we commence with the program, I'm going to invite Rabbi Klein to the podium for his introduction. Thank you again for coming here today.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for those wonderful introductory remarks. I'm Roger Klein, one of the rabbis at the Temple Tifereth Israel here in Cleveland. I have been to this church on several occasions, both as a listener to musical programs. I've also participated with some frequency in the adult learning programs here, and actually have spoken here from this magnificent sanctuary. I know that you feel, as I do, that there is nothing quite so wonderful as to hear these magnificent organ pieces in an awesome sanctuary like this. Bach and this space is really something that creates for us a singular experience. What I want to do as my part in this program is to offer brief commentary in between the pieces. I hope you'll agree that what I have to say is brief, but I thought it was important not to take anything away from the main course of this program, and that is the music itself, to offer some context, both in terms of Bach's music and Bach's life. So I want to offer as my first bit of commentary some notes on Bach's life itself. Johann Sebastian Bach was born on March 31st in 1685 in Eisenach in Germany, just 3 weeks after the birth of George Frederick Handel. Bach was born into a family of musicians that included more than 50 musicians, composers and performers, going back several generations. Now, when both Bach's parents died, and both had died before Bach's 11th birthday, he went to live with his older brother, Johann Christoph Bach, who cared for him, gave him his first keyboard lessons, and encouraged his younger brother's career. Bach married twice, first to Maria Barbara, who died at a relatively young age, and then to Anna Magdalena. Together, these two women bore, and this is no typo, 20 children, only 10 of whom reached adulthood. Two of Bach's sons, Wilhelm Friedemann and Carl Philipp Emanuel, themselves became famous musicians. Carl Philipp Emanuel himself was and played an important role in the transition between the Baroque period and the classical period of music, and Mozart referred to him as our father, an important person. Bach's career as a church composer and performer took him to many places in Germany throughout his life. His first real assignment as both an organist and as a composer was in Arnstadt, where he lived between 1703 and 1707. In 1708, he accepted a position in Weimar, which he held until 1717. In Weimar, and in his next position in Anhalt-Köthen, he composed mostly music for keyboard and other instruments. And especially late in his Weimar period, he composed very little church music, due to the interesting fact that his employer there, a certain Prince Leopold, himself a somewhat severe Calvinist, did not require Bach to compose the more common church music of the Lutheran tradition. As a result, late in his Weimar period, he created some of the works that are front and center in the repertoire: the Brandenburg concertos, the partitas for solo violin, and the cello suites. In 1723, Bach assumed his final position in Leipzig as cantor at the St. Thomas Church and as the director of the St. Thomas School, while also providing 4 Leipzig Lutheran churches with music for their weekly Sunday services. Bach remained in Leipzig, sometimes happily, often unhappily, for the last 27 years of his life. And there in Leipzig, he composed some of his greatest music, among which are the St. John and the St. Matthew Passions, the B minor Mass, Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. In addition to this, he composed more than 200 cantatas for Sunday worship. Although Bach sustained a remarkable creativity throughout these years, these were years filled with problems and with frustrations, along with famous disputes with the authorities in the cities and churches in which he worked. At the very end of his life, Bach breathed his last, and this is 1750. He died at the age of 65. At the end of his life, he breathed his last while he was occupied while revising the magnificent art of the fugue, which, as some of you remember, was performed here in the last year or two, a concert that I attended. On the last page of this manuscript for the art of the fugue, the composing stops in mid-thought. And at that point, Bach's son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, wrote the following in German. While working on this fugue, the composer died. About this, the Bach scholar Leonard Dreyfus speculates that though Bach had arrived at this point in the art of the fugue composition long before his last days, he, and now I quote Dreyfus, he chose through inaction to leave this work unfinished at this point. Dreyfus, in other words, sees the fact that Bach stopped in mid-thought not as an accident as something that happened to Bach, but as Bach's own choice, for reasons that scholars speculate and that we can only ponder. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. What a magnificent piece that is. I want now to spend a few moments defining some terms that show up in the titles of these pieces. Those who know them have a sense of what they describe. And I'm going to talk about the following terms: imitation, polyphony, canon, fugue, toccata, and pedal point. What is imitative music? Imitation is a generic term representing music in which a melodic idea is played and then repeated or imitated, sometimes strictly and sometimes freely, by a different instrument or voice, or instruments or voices. For example, a very free form of imitation can be found in the famous opening movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Dun 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 dun, 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 and so on. A form of imitation that is free because it can be elaborated in a variety of different ways. Polyphony. Polyphony comes from the Greek two words, poly and phone, many sounds. Polyphony is a type of imitation in which two or more instruments or voices play simultaneously and play equally important lines in which the melody occurs in both of the voices. As opposed, for example, to a musical texture with just one voice, monophony, or music with one voice, theme, accompanied by a dependent accompaniment. For example, a Tchaikovsky symphony with a main theme and accompaniment which serves the main theme. Different forms of polyphony. Two types of polyphony represented here this afternoon are first, canon. A canon is the kind of music in which voice number one states a musical motif and voice number two comes in with the same motif before voice one has finished its statement. Voice one starts and moves, and here voice two comes in, and then they are playing together. We will hear a canon at the beginning of our last piece, the Toccata and Fugue in F major. A canon, if you will understand what I'm saying here, represents a kind of exact and not free imitation through much, if not all, of a piece. Think, for example, of Row, Row, Row Your Boat, which is a strict canon throughout. A fugue, on the other hand, is a kind of imitation which features a musical theme or motif which is stated in its entirety before another voice comes in as its counterpoint, and in which the fugue motif is subject not to strict imitation, where the voices throughout are imitating the one imitating the other, but in which a variety of forms of development take place. Imitation with variation and development. What about the word toccata, which features as the title of our last piece, the Toccata and Fugue in F major? Originally, the word toccata referred to something touched, from the Latin word toccare, in contrast to a cantata, which referred to something sung, touched on a musical instrument or sung. A toccata features brilliant displays of the performer's touch and technique, and it's characterized by brilliant displays of chords, of rapid runs, of fast moving and lightly fingered playing. You'll hear a toccata, our toccata, reflected in that way. What is a pedal point? One of the fascinating aspects of the organ is the pedal, an aspect of the instrument that is played by the feet of the performer. The pedal apparatus contains all the notes of the chromatic scale, just as the notes of the fingerboard does, so that any single or perhaps double line can be played by the feet. There are two concepts here that are going to be important for us this afternoon. First of all, the idea of the virtuoso pedal, where the pedal, as it were, shows itself off and doesn't just indicate some of the bass notes of a particular chord, the virtuoso pedal. Then there is the pedal point itself, in which one note is sustained over a long period of time. And we will hear that many times. Before we listen to the next piece, the Fantasia and Fugue in G minor, I want to say just a word about this astonishing organ piece. And here I'm going to limit myself to comments by Bach scholars. Harvard musicologist Christoph Wolff remarks that the piece, and I'm quoting him, shows thoroughly innovative approaches that are immediately recognizable, such as a fantasy of exceptional rhetorical power, unparalleled harmonic scope, with towering chromatic chords over descending pedal steps, plus a symmetrically constructed fugue theme with a rich texture and a very important role for the pedal. Alex Ross, a New Yorker columnist, calls this piece, and I quote him, a piece that feasts on dissonance with almost diabolical glee of a kind of sonic terrorism. Let me repeat that. I think you will hear what Ross is talking about. A piece that feasts on dissonance with almost diabolical glee of a kind of sonic terrorism. And so I suggest that you listen carefully in this next piece for the piece's rhetorical power, how it persuades us in an overwhelming way, its diabolical dissonances, its astonishing harmonies, and its descending pedal scales. I don't know about you, but I find myself overwhelmed by that piece. The Fantasia and Fugue in G minor with a BWV number 542, BWV parallel to Opus, an Opus number, Bach Werke Verzeichnis, Bach's works cataloged by a man named Schmieder. And unlike the opus numbers of many composers' pieces, it does not develop chronologically. Beethoven's opus numbers, the higher the number, the later in Beethoven's life. This catalog is organized topically by genres. So we have the organ preludes and fugues from something like 520 to, I'm not sure, close to 600. And this is BWV 542. Again, overwhelming. I want to spend a few minutes talking about something from Johann Sebastian's life itself. And that's a topic that I'm going to call Bach's Walks. That is the journeys on foot that he made during his lifetime. I think as scholars do, that this phenomenon in his life reflects something about his personality and his character. So when Bach scholars talk about Bach the person, they tend to use the following kinds of adjectives: headstrong, determined, single-minded, devoted, obdurate, recalcitrant. Qualities that had become apparent already in Bach's youth. Now, these qualities, as I'm sure you can understand, led to both great accomplishments as well as to noteworthy conflicts with his contemporaries and with his employers. Bach's strong will manifested itself early in two instances of long journeys on foot. Two long and arduous trips that reveal Bach's strong character as well as his devotion to his craft. First, when he was barely 15 years old, around the year 1700, and studying in a city with the name Ohrdruf, he and a schoolmate decided to walk to a city with the name of Lüneburg to complete their education. And so according to an exit note in one of the contemporary school registers, and I quote, Sebastian set out for Lüneburg on March 15th, 1700, and walked the entire 168 miles to this faraway destination. And here is what the Bach scholar Christian Wolff has to say about this. Sebastian's move to faraway Lüneburg was surely of his own free will. In making for himself a decision with such incalculable consequences, the boy already demonstrated an astonishing degree of independence and confidence. For he was the only one of his father's children, and among the first of Hans Bach's 2 great-grandchildren, to break out of the family's ancestral territory between the cities of Erfurt and Eisenach and Schweinfurt. Yet the pursuit of academic goals could hardly have been the sole driving force for this adventurous undertaking. And among other possible motivating factors, 2, Wolff goes on to say, stand out. A desire for emancipation and autonomy. A strongly independent mind remained a salient feature of his character throughout his life. A desire for emancipation and autonomy, and an apparently boundless curiosity about the grand organs of northern Germany, presaging a lifelong dedication to the organ, to organ music, and to organ playing, end quote. 5 years later, when Bach was barely 20 years old and working now in Arnstadt, he wanted to visit the famous North German composer and organist Dietrich Buxtehude, who lived some 250 miles away in the city of Lübeck. For if ever there was a musician Bach was dying to meet, it was Buxtehude. So he applied to his employers for a leave of absence of 1 month, a request that was granted. And thereupon, in the winter of 1705-1706, Bach walked the entire distance, a trip of 250 miles that would have taken at least 10 days each way. And Bach knew that Buxtehude had a great deal to offer, for he was a celebrated virtuoso, composer, and scholar. And there Bach learned a great deal from Buxtehude about the crafting of fugues and about the potential for the virtuoso pedal itself. And so that 1 month stretched out into 4 months, 4 months of absence, which understandably enraged his employers and led to a heap of trouble upon his return, a matter which I will have more to say a few minutes later. We're about to hear the Prelude and Fugue in E minor. It has the subtitle, The Wedge, because of the shape of the main theme of the fugue, which looks like this, where the organ is playing this, then this, then this, then this, as both lines, like a wedge, reach both parts of an octave, arising chromatically in half steps. All of these are half steps, except for one, the wedge, Prelude and Fugue. I don't know about you, but when I hear that fugue, I can barely understand how a person who saw the same sun come up in the morning and walked the same earth that we walk could have written something like that. What did Bach see? What did Bach know that allowed him to do that? So I want to spend a few moments talking about not the immortal Bach, which we just witnessed, but the mere mortal Johann Sebastian Bach. And I want to talk a little bit about Bach's trouble with his employers. I've already alluded briefly to the debacle that awaited him when he returned home 3 months late from a visit to Buxtehude, but there is much more. One commentator asserts that, yes, for all the resistance that Bach experienced from his employers, he himself was anything but a paragon of virtue. In fact, this commentator goes on to say that Bach was a deeply flawed individual. Indeed, great artists can produce remarkable works while at the same time being problematic as individuals. And I want to illustrate this idea by means of 2 examples. Evidently, during his time as organist in Arnstadt in 1705, Bach, in one of the many examples of his problems with others, had verbally assaulted a student by the name of Geyersbach by calling him to his face and to his embarrassment a Zippelfagotist, that is, a greenhorn bassoonist, an expression of Bach's fiery temper as well as his low tolerance for what he considered to be mediocrity. And one fine evening thereafter, Geyersbach happened upon Bach in the street and struck back, going after him with a stick, which led Bach to draw his dagger. And now they were brawling in the market square. A much more serious conflict developed some years later in 1717 between Bach and the court of the Duke in Weimar, where he had been employed since 1708 and where he had achieved much acclaim. The details of this scene are hazy. They were evidently matters that concerned, as they usually did with Bach, money and position. But they were certainly serious enough, these circumstances, for Bach first to make some kind of demand, perhaps to be freed from his contract, and then to lose his temper, all of which enraged his employers and led Bach's being thrown into jail for a month, and then to be dismissed unfavorably. This certainly was a low point in Bach's career. And throughout his life, Bach continually picked fights with others, including a confrontation with a Richter, the word in German meaning headmaster, who didn't want Bach to play too much music in his school. This led Bach, in an apparently ugly confirmation, to call the Richter Rechtor, which means dirty ear. And when finally Bach moves to Leipzig, there were many more such disagreements and more confrontations, causing one town official to name him incorrigible. Alas, a certain fellow composer once made the claim that, and I quote, "This great man would be the admiration of whole nations if he had more agreeableness," end quote. And for his part, Bach's Leipzig experience led him to conclude, and I quote, that this has been an experience of almost continual vexation, envy, and persecution, end quote. Yet in a moment of possible introspection, Bach wrote the following note in his Bible. As far as your person is concerned, you must not get angry with anyone, regardless of the injury he may have done to you. But where your office requires it, there you must get angry, end quote. And this comment leads Alex Ross of The New Yorker to the following observation. One can picture Bach here struggling to determine whether his almost continual vexation stemmed from his person or from his office. That is, from vanity or from duty. I want to begin my concluding remarks by saying something about what to me is the central or one of the central goals of an education. And then I want to connect this idea with the final piece of this concert. In my view, an important goal of education, of proper education, is to create an appetite for more, to inflame desire, and to set an individual on a lifelong path of deeper and deeper understanding of and a deeper and deeper passion for the things that matter. I took 2 courses in college in music, and that was more than 60 years ago, and both courses have had an ever-deepening impact on my life. One of them was a Bach seminar taught by an impactful teacher, Milton Gill, of blessed memory. It was under his tutelage that I first began my lifelong love affair with Johann Sebastian Bach, a love affair that continues to this very moment. And I want to thank Jonathan Moyer for his willingness to work with me on the development and the implementation of this program, and to play Bach's glorious music with such skill and feeling. Would you join me in thanking Jonathan, please? Quite a marathon for an organist. One of the pieces which drew me powerfully to Bach during that college course was the piece we're about to hear, the Toccata and Fugue in F major. And I want to call your attention to just a few of the elements that make this piece, and especially the toccata, so mighty. First, note the canon, that form of strict imitation to which I referred earlier in our program, with the right hand upper voice introducing the theme and the left hand lower voice coming in quickly with exactly the same music. And this canonical imitation continues for 2 minutes. Underneath this canon is a pedal point on the note F. It's a piece in F major, a note which is held for 80 seconds. At this point, the pedal itself intones the basic motif for another 30 seconds as a virtuoso solo. Then the whole thing is played again, this time with the left hand lower voice in the lead and the right hand upper voice following. The pedal point is there too, now on the dominant, the note C, followed by the pedal virtuoso solo. Then this long introductory section concludes with 7 pairs of notes as a cadence, which leads us directly to the long development section. One more thought. About 4 minutes into this work, we experience what we might call a deceptive cadence. That is a cadence which deliciously undermines our expectation. Here with a dissonant chord, you will notice it, it's quite obvious. And this is a cadence which returns deceptively throughout the piece. So, with such a spacious and brilliantly structured introduction, we know that the remainder of it will take us on more of this extraordinary journey. Enjoy this piece, and I hope you have enjoyed as much as I have this astonishingly brilliant music of Johann Sebastian Bach.